Recently, successive governments in your country and in mine legitimized the behavior of corporate bureaucrats who rewarded themselves handsomely, win or lose. It legitimized the behavior of bankers who took enormous risks, knowing their institutions were too big to fail. It legitimized politicians, the behavior of politicians who promised benefits that their nations could ill afford. So I think it's therefore not a terrible thing that my government and yours seek at times to delegitimize certain behavior, although I'm not a fan of Vince Cable's notions of the banking community. Now, I think that disciples of Adam Smith should not be offended by that concept for two reasons. First, a lot of government actions are offsets to the imperfections in the market in which executive compensation is set, and I'll return to that in a minute. Second, the restraint on executive compensation. I know that all my friends who are supporters of the Adam Smith Institute and have a very negative attitude to that, has positive externalities, as Smith pointed out. He wrote, "Besides all the bad effects to the country in general resulting from a high rate of profit, there is one more fatal perhaps than all these put together, but is inseparably connected with it. The high rate of profit seems everywhere to destroy the parsimony which in other circumstances is natural to the character of the merchant. If his employer is attentive and parsimonious, the workman is very likely to be so. But if the master is dissolute and disorderly, the servant will shape his life too, according to the example which he sets him. The capital of the country, instead of increasing, gradually dwindles away." Now let me end this excuse for what follows. This is all by way of saying I'm apologizing to you for suggesting government action, but with two final thoughts, two final preliminary thoughts, if that's as good as neo-orthodoxy. First, this is designed to stimulate thought. I really, Nobel laureate James Buchanan suggests that in doing that, in trying to stimulate thought, he said, in a brief treatment, which this will be, although not brief enough for many of you, in a brief treatment, it is helpful to make bold charges against ideas or positions taken by leading figures. And since I regard Amen as a leading figure, some of these charges might be so taken. Second, I mean no disrespect for the proponents of limited government action in the economic sphere. I'm a devotee of what Adam Smith had to teach. I consider these the great orthodoxies, but Smith and others lived in a society that no longer exists. Adam Smith wrote at a time when shame was a brake on economic behavior, when transactions often occurred between parties for whom reputational capital being a concept unknown in Washington or Westminster, in which reputational capital was their most important asset. And that was then, and this is now. I don't think we can wave our copies of The Wealth of Nations at those who would expand the role of government and expect that to have the force of waving a cross at a vampire. What we can do is adapt much of Smith's teachings to, without subverting his principles. Now, principles, is this Westminster that we're in? I mean, I hate to mention that term, principles, given your coalition government, but as Groucho Marx said, I have my principles, and if you don't like them, I have another set. Now, those of us who admire Adam Smith, can I suggest, develop this neo-orthodoxy, a kind of new capitalism rooted in old verities, adapted to the way we live now. And I think we have to do that because capitalism, market capitalism, is under siege everywhere. And the model, let's call it the Anglo-Saxon model, if that makes any of you who are here from France feel happy. The Anglo-Saxon model is no longer considered as it was, let's say, in the days of Margaret Thatcher, to be the model to which other countries aspire. Now, I'm not insensitive to Milton Friedman's warning that the bulk of the intellectual community automatically favors any expansion of government power so long as it's advertised as a way to make life more equal. I understand that. And I start all of this with an undeniable fact. Market capitalism has been unrivaled in its ability to produce material well-being. I don't think any other system has produced material well-being on that scale, or distributed the goods and services more widely than any other system with which societies have experimented. The bourgeoisie, said Karl Marx, and his sidekick, Friedrich Engels, I don't know if you've seen the new biography of him, very fond of fox hunting, said that during its rule of scarce 100 years, capitalism has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations taken together. And that is undeniable. They had it right, but they had it wrong about how the results of that are distributed. The poor live better in capitalist countries than the middle class does in most other countries, or in the Middle East, certainly in Africa, despite the vast natural resources of those countries. The ones who now are offering their models as alternatives, the so-called BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, all have problems. China is coming up against what environmentalists once called the limits of growth. I won't go into the defects in these other countries, but I am an advocate of market capitalism. The negative effects of too much government in other countries, and Milton Friedman's appropriate warning about the intellectual community's love affair with big government, do not mean there is no role for government. Let me suggest 6. I was going to try to get to 10, but that would seem presumptuous to offer you 10 commandments for your consideration. The 6 I have in mind are fostering competition, regulating where necessary. I know regulation is a word that's not well received in this audience sometime. Internalizing externalities, I'll explain that for the non-economists in the crowd. Offsetting or correcting market failures. Incorporating in policies, in trade policies, the subtleties of Adam Smith. And here I tread carefully, ensuring that the results of the system, of our system, of market capitalism system, as described by Adam Smith, are deemed to be equitable. I know all the problems about Selden and equity as long as the Chancellor's foot and all of that, but I figured, I said at the beginning, this was designed to throw out ideas. Let's talk about, first of all, the obligation of government to foster and preserve competition.